Okay, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Concetta Martone Dragani. And Concetta was born in Naples, Italy, and she has her PhD from Tyler School of Art at Temple. And she is a professor at both Temple University and Thomas Jefferson University. And she's been a professor at TJU for 16 years. Concetta is also a member of the Board of Trustees of the Ebenezer Maxwell Mansion. And she just, I just know her quite well now. And she's a wonderful professor for those Thomas Jefferson students. And she also has brought her classes to the mansion, which takes a lot of organization on her part, and but to great advantage of the students, I believe, and the mansion. And she even brought them to our Deep Rivers tour. We are recording this, and she also has done 2 other talks, if you've missed them, on William Morris and also the aesthetic movement. And they are on the mansion's YouTube page, which our website has a link to the YouTube page. So if you haven't seen those, also click on those to enjoy that talk. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Concetta.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice introductions. And needless to say, I'm very excited to do this talk. I always very much enjoy doing it. And I'm proud to be part of the board and participating in many of the activities and that are, part of our organization. So I'm glad to be here today. So let's begin, and I'm going to share the screen, okay? Here with me. Okay, so we can see it. All right, so here we are. One thing I forgot to say that I wanted to say that this is, it's a topic that has always fascinated me. And I kind of felt it was a great opportunity for me to dig in a little bit. But since I started researching for this talk, I feel like even more passionate about it. And I think as a result of this, I might continue the research on this and perhaps with a little more focus. So this was kind of a good adventure for me. So I'm very thankful for that as well. Okay, so here we begin. Colors are all around us. Our experience of the physical world involves the identification of objects by their appearance. And colors, among other things, help us distinguish how one object is similar or different from another. Yet, while we can detect color on the surface of an object, it is not an actual property of the object. What we perceive as color is a sensation produced in the eye by certain characteristic of transmitted and reflected light and processed by the brain, as Martin Kemp has explained in his The Science of Art. In other words, objects appear color in so much as we, the observers, perceive them as such in our eye and brain. We understand today that color is a subjective perception, one that relies on physiological mechanism and psychological associations. During the 19th century, as scholar Jonathan Crary has pointed out, attitudes towards color were just beginning to change, as physiological understanding of the eye and technologies of seeing developed. In particular, it was discovered that color, far from being secondary to the individual's primary image of the external world, as a philosopher had posited, was indeed primary. Newly developed color theories offer novel scientific insights on color perception, and visual artists responded with interest in them. Color was reassessed as central to the visual experience, and as such, its role was reconsidered in the visual arts. Bright visual effects characterized the works of a new generation of visual artists in 19th century Britain. Contrasting generally held assumption, analyzed by John Gage, that saw color as secondary to form and ascribed the taste for vivid colors to that of children and the uneducated, these artists embraced bright coloration as a means to challenge old traditions and advance the visual arts at a moment of crisis. In this talk, we will discuss the Victorian Palette in 3 case studies: Owen Jones' decoration for the 1851 World Exhibition Building, the paintings by the founding members of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and some of their associates, and the designs by Christopher Dresser. In their works, these visual artists devised novel color effects aimed to engage the viewers in an all-new way. The 19th century was a tumultuous time in Britain, marked by dramatic technological, political, economic, and social changes, which happened at a startlingly fast pace, changing tremendously all aspects of the lived experience. Social commentator Thomas Carlyle identified contemporary industrialization as the main characteristic of 19th century British culture. He saw industrialization as the spirit of this age, differentiating it from preceding period defined by unifying spiritual fervor. Victorian culture hung in the balance, and many worried that the current religious crisis, combined with the new emphasis on utilitarian principles, were negatively impacting artistic and architectural standards. Innovation was not encouraged by the prevailing artistic establishments, the Royal Academy, and the Institute of British Architects. These institutions remained committed to tradition, supporting restrictive rules that limited creative experimentation. Some of the artists and architects who had trained or were still training at these institutions became increasingly critical of this approach and called for change. In protest, they rejected academic theories and practices that upheld systemized approaches to art and design, and sought to renew British visual culture by re-examining earlier, more intuitive approaches to art making that rely on direct perception of the natural world of which color was part. At the core of their success was the understanding that color effects were as much the creation of the artist as of the viewer, as color sensations were produced in the viewer's eye. As we shall see, this concept was central to the deployment of color in Victorian architecture, interior and industrial design, and in art. The Great Exhibition of the Industry of All Nations opened on May 1st, 1851, at the Crystal Palace at Hyde Park. This event was a defining moment of 19th century Britain. The exhibition was meant to prove the excellence of British industrial design and manufacture in an international context, branding Britain as an industrial powerhouse. The exhibition's organizer was Henry Cole, who also chaired the committee that launched an open competition to solicit designs for the exhibition's building. Joseph Paxson won the competition with a glass and iron design that distinguished itself for its unrivaled mechanical ingenuity. Finished in a mere 11 months and entirely constructed with prefabricated iron components and assembled on site, the building was 1,851 feet long and enclosed 93,000 square meters of uninterrupted floor space. The 6,024 cast iron columns and 1,245 wrought iron girders that formed the structural frame were left unadorned and simply painted white. It was at this moment in the genesis of the Crystal Palace that, supported by Henry Cole, the architect Owen Jones stepped in with an ambitious and novel color scheme. While the use of iron and the sophisticated engineering techniques greatly contributed to the success of the building, it was Jones's innovative system of multicolored decoration that endowed the interior space with unforgettable visual impact. As a contemporary noted, without Jones' assistance, the Crystal Palace would have been but an overgrown greenhouse. Jones differed from other contemporary architectural practitioners as he opposed revivalist styles in architecture and called for buildings true to the times, as new and advanced as technological progress permitted. He believed that the new architecture of iron required its own system of ornamentation, one that enriched construction and enhanced the architecture's visual effect. Jones, who greatly admired the structural integrity of Paxton's design, as Carol Flores has pointed out, realized that the shading system planned for the roof and the south side of the Crystal Palace would have altered the appearance of the iron frame, transforming it into an indistinct mass. Painting the structural members white as it was planned would have further diminished the structure's visual impact by making the columns and the girder appear flat. To solve the problem, Jones designed a unique method of color application, leveraging his own examination of the use of color in ancient architecture, his own direct observation of the function of color as perceived in nature, and his knowledge of the latest theories in color optic and perception. Jones advanced a scientific method for color application that highlighted the structural frame as an integral component of a dazzling visual effect. Jones was well known for his scientific investigation of polychromy, that is, color in ancient architecture. Polychromy was the subject of increasing interest and scholarship in this period. During the first half of the 19th century, archaeological discoveries disproved the belief in vogue, at least since the Renaissance. The Greek architecture was pure white, providing irrefutable evidence that the ancients loved bright colors. Referring to the Greeks' British colors, Sir William Gell asserted that no nation ever exhibited a greater passion for gaudy colors. Interested in this train of research, Jones had spent several years traveling and researching the topic. He had found that not only the Greeks, but also the Egyptians and the Arabs used primary colors in architecture. Jones studied the Moorish palace Alhambra in Granada, Spain. In analyzing Alhambra's ornamentation, as Flores has pointed out, he observed that color, in addition to distance and lighting, were factors in affecting the viewer's perception of the ornamental effect. Jones experienced how a balanced composition of primaries produced a lively bloom at a distance that was a visual effect created by the optical blending of the primary colors into a white, luminous light, while when the colors were observed up close, remained distinct and brilliant. Jones wondered about what the correct ratios of the primaries would be to create such a balanced neutrality of white light. He found his answer in the color theories developed by George Field. Field, who was a renowned producer of pigments who counted among his clients the Pre-Raphaelites, had recently published the results of his experiments with spectral primaries, proving that light was composed of 3 parts of yellow, 5 parts of red, and 8 parts of blue. Jones was also aware from Michel-Eugène Chevreul's chromatic laws that colors were perceived very differently when isolated or juxtaposed. The Alhambra experience and the awareness of Fields and Chevreul's discoveries were fundamental to Jones' application of polychromy to modern building techniques, Jones succeeded in devising a system of multicolored decoration based on the three primary colors. As described by Flores, red, yellow, and blue were applied in narrow stripes separated by white, following Chevreul's theory, and in ratios according to Field's experiment with the light spectrum. He also organized the colors to imitate the effect of light and shade. Blue, which recedes, was placed on concave surfaces, yellow, which advances, on the convex, and red, the color of middle distance, on the horizontal planes. With this strategy, Jones believed that at a distance, the colors would blend in the eye of the viewer, producing a neutralizing effect that would be perceived as a soft white light, and close-up colors would appear distinct and vivid. When Jones first submitted his proposal, the scheme was ridiculed by the press, and the architect became the target of intense criticism, in particular for his selection of the bright primary colors. Reporters anticipated that the decoration would be painful, unsightly, and vulgar, affected by such hideous glare of colors. That was in quote. The criticism did not deter Jones, who was confident the scheme would work. And indeed, on the day of the grand opening, contemporaries applauded Jones' design, and in particular, the harmonious atmospheric effect he achieved. The viewers compare to the luminous haziness of Turner's landscapes. The interior's visual effect was captured in writing by a reporter for the Illustrated London News, who described the changing lighting sensation as he moved away from the central transept. Passing from this central spot, the light becomes more subdued in every direction, and as the eye wanders up the vistas, the three primitive colors, red, yellow, and blue, strike the eye by the intensity of their brightness in the foreground, but by blending in the distance, the whole, as in nature, disappears into neutrality. At the Crystal Palace, Jones introduced a new system of architectural ornamentation centered on pure color. Jones understood that color played an important role in determining the viewer's perception of form and in shaping their experience of the space it enclosed. And as such, it had an important role in the development of the new architecture of iron. Bright coloration was also central to the work of three young painters, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, William Holman Hunt, and John Everett Millais, who in 1848 founded an artistic society called the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, PRB. The preference for brilliant hues characterized their works and distinguished them from those of their contemporaries. When Millais and Hunt showed their pictures at the 1851 Royal Academy exhibition, the Pre-Raphaelite associate Ford Madox Brown noted that their works killed everything else with their bright hues. Bright colors was one of the visual attributes that contributed to the unusual look of the Pre-Raphaelite pictures. The Pre-Raphaelites sought to revitalize Victorian art. They rejected the methods taught at the Royal Academy and searched for a pure approach to art making, one that was true to materials and to the artist's optical perception of the world. As Alison Smith has pointed out, their search produced bold representations distinguished by sharp focus, attention to detail across the surface, and the use of pure and mixed colors. In their strong deployment of color, the Pre-Raphaelites were inspired by the pre-Renaissance painters. These earlier works were often derided by the academic painters as childlike and primitive and inferior to the masterpieces of the Renaissance masters that were instead upheld as examples worth emulation. Yet, according to Elizabeth Pratt-Jones, the Pre-Raphaelites were attracted to the pre-Renaissance models exactly for their naivete, which for them was more instructive than the teaching of the Royal Academicians. In the 1840s, the preference for pure color and the practice to paint on a white ground layer were seen as the contributing factors to the bright aesthetic of the works of 15th century Flemish and Italian painters. Several books have been published around this time that investigated scientifically the techniques of the pre-Renaissance masters. Mary Philadelphia Merrifield had translated in 1844 the important 15th century treatise on painting methods by Cennino Cennini, Il Libro dell'Arte. In the book, Cennini described the ground used by early Italian artists as white as milk and as smooth as ivory. In 1847, Charles Locke Eastlake, in his survey of methods employed by the earliest oil painters, described the technique of applying paint in transparent layers, a method mastered by the Flemish artist Jan van Eyck. Dante Gabriel Rossetti was the first of the Pre-Raphaelite brothers to embrace experimentation with the early masters' techniques. As a friend who visited him while painting the girlhood of Virgin Mary noted, he was painting in oils on canvas which he had primed with white till the surface was as smooth as a cardboard, and every tint remained transparent. Paint transparency was crucial to achieve the desired luminous effect. By superimposing colors in transparent layers instead of mixing them on the palette, and by allowing the bright white ground to make its effect through the paint layers, Rossetti was able to obtain increased luminosity and vivid color. This painting method was soon adopted by the rest of the Pre-Raphaelites and also their associates. The painting on the screen is an unfinished work by Frederick Stevens, an associate of the Pre-Raphaelites. Here you can observe a fine white ground layer, right over here, applied over a coarser layer underneath, visible in the unfinished portion of the painting. Stevens, according to Pratt-Jones, painted the composition in individual sections rather than an integrated whole, and run into trouble when the various parts looked awkward when seen together, and abandoned the painting. The Pre-Raphaelites sought out the best materials to achieve their vivid coloration. Advances in chemical and industrial research during the 19th century greatly expanded the artist's palette with the introduction of new pigments produced with synthetic compounds that replaced many of the traditional natural colorants. The Pre-Raphaelites eagerly availed themselves of the new pigments, experimenting with them in their works. They purchased the new pigments from George Field. His colorants, in the opinion of contemporary experts, were the closest modern equivalents to the bright colors of the pre-Renaissance artists. It has been proposed by Gage that the colors of Millet's Bridesmaid corresponded to Field's most celebrated pigments: deep ultramarine blue, which you see in the background, vivid vermilion used in the flowing hair, lemon yellow on the gown, and madder, a purplish red for the plate. The Pre-Raphaelites often used a combination of these hues in their works. Vermilion features prominently in Hunt's Valentine rescuing Sylvia from Proteus, and rose madder shines in the Pre-Raphaelite associate Ford Madox Brown, The Last of England. Ultramarine triumphs in Millet's Mariana, but the newest color on the Pre-Raphaelite palette was green. Green was the color of nature, and the Pre-Raphaelites required greens that were as close as possible to the ones they saw outdoors. In the Proscribed Royalist, as discovered by Libby Sheldon, Millet mixed the new translucent acidic yellow pigments with translucent blues, and with a little of the new emerald green to achieve the green coloration. Perhaps a similar mixture of translucent pigments was used in his most famous painting, Ophelia. The other new addition was purple. Previously, painters would achieve a purple coloration by mixing blues and reds, either by glazing one over the other or by making mixtures, physical mixtures. The results were dull and somber. On the contrary, the synthetic purple was bright and beautiful, quickly becoming a favorite of the Pre-Raphaelites, and in particular their associate Arthur Hughes, who made it his trademark. In the long engagement, he deploys the new green and purple in a radiant effect impossible with traditional pigments. The art critic, John Ruskin, was most impressed with the Pre-Raphaelites' works at the 1851 Royal Academy exhibition. He wrote 2 celebrated letters to the Times defending the artists from the critiques of the old art establishment. Ruskin admired the Pre-Raphaelites' commitment to optical truth and their directness in the examining of nature. In 1853, Hunt exhibited at the Royal Academy a work entirely painted outdoor. In Our English Coasts, Hunt demonstrated his enormous capacity for observation, recording every detail of the landscape and capturing the changing effect of sunlight. Capturing every effect of sunlight as it fell on every object and texture. Hunt produced astonishing effects of color by exploiting the potential of simultaneous contrast. Instead of painting the wool coat of the sheep in a fixed local color as it would have been expected, he placed different areas of color close to one another on the surface. The wool coat of the sheep in the foreground is made up of tiny strokes of complementary colors that blend together optically as the viewer steps back, as Smith has noted. Even the shadows are vividly colored in blues and violets, not simply rendered in dark tones, as it was the practice of the time. As Predijon has proposed, what was really novel about the Pre-Raphaelite approach to color in the landscape was the way in which the artist allowed, in quote, each color to stand on its own in its darkest purity, end of quote, without concern for the overall color scheme. For the Pre-Raphaelites, no element of the picture was more important than another. No component was to be subordinated or sacrificed to the coherence of the whole. In terms of color, each hue had its own identity, its own verve, which could not be compromised. For the Pre-Raphaelites, everything in the picture was equally important as it needed to be rendered with the same emphasis and fidelity to its perceived appearance. As the pre-Renaissance masters, who were seen to have recorded their perception intuitively without the aid of a mechanical system for ordering what they saw, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to react to what they perceived without analyzing it, as Predijon has explained. They approached the task of seeing and recording the world with great diligence and precision, capturing even the smallest detail and slightest change in hue. The precise translation on the canvas of the artist's optical perceptions was made possible by an arduous working method that resulted in vivid and detailed pictures that shocked the critics and intrigued the general public. As Predijon has pointed out, there was a purpose behind the artist's choice of technique. It was a means to an end. The Pre-Raphaelites sought to achieve what she calls maximum visibility, especially when working outdoors, as Predijon does explain, in quote, they sought to make every mark the physical trace of a particular visual stimulus, end of quotes. The Pre-Raphaelites presented the Victorian audience with intense images that challenged traditional ways of looking at the world, empowering the viewer, as the same scholars argued, unquote, to see more color, more detail, more light, end of quote. Ultimately, the Pre-Raphaelites sought to establish an unfiltered connection between optical perception and what was depicted on the canvas, without bias, elaboration, or interpretation of the visual experience. In their attentive investigation of nature, the Pre-Raphaelites followed Ruskin's call to go to nature, but they were not alone in their fascination with the natural world. According to Barbara Gates, Victorians were in love with natural history. David Allen has described Victorians' passion for the natural world as a series of crazes over geology, over shells, over ferns. Victorians engaged the natural world, collecting, drawing, and cataloging nature. Nature held truths that could be discovered by the keen eye. The natural world was well represented at the World Exhibition of 1851 as naturalistic ornamentation characterized British goods in the exhibition. The international event was a tremendous financial and public success, but the organizing committee, led by Henry Cole, saw it differently. They were disheartened by the lack of design originality and the naturalistic excesses of the product's ornamentation. In their opinion, the exhibition had made clear that industrial production required some system of ornament and that the artistic principles recognized over a century had become obsolete in their adaptation to industrial practices of fabrication. Concerned with the current state of the industrial arts, they mounted a counter exhibition to expose the faults in the design of the British products shown at the international exhibition. The main idea of the display was further clarified in the catalog, emphasizing that direct imitation of nature in decoration was to be abhorred. The exhibition attracted much attention. Some critics ridiculed the exhibit and the attitude of the organizers/reformers, but the exhibition did succeed in advancing influential ideas and publicizing new principles of design. Owen Jones' publication, The Grammar of Ornament, codified these new principles in 37 propositions, of which 26 concerned the issue of color. As we have seen, the Pre-Raphaelites carefully rendered color in nature, allowing, following Predicate Jones, each color to stand on its own. Jones and his follower, Christopher Dresser, instead, sought to define new principles by which the color of nature could be ordered to produce harmonious visual effects perceived as a sense of repose that brought satisfaction to the viewers. Christopher Dresser was still a student when he was asked by Owen Jones to draw the final plate for the Grammar of Ornament. Dresser, who had studied plant morphology, was beginning to apply his knowledge of botany to artistic design. For Dresser, as Barry Bergdahl has noted, the observation and study of the underlying patterns in nature served as the starting point for the development of new and original designs. Jones had been promoting geometric patterns and conventionalized form from nature in place of naturalistic realism, and flat pattern had been adopted as the standards in the British Reform movement. However, Dresser did not consider Jones' conventionalized forms as a fully developed new system of ornament. Dresser approached conventionalization as a stage in the process of artistic manipulation of the geometric principles of order found in nature. His objective was the creation of purely ideal ornament, the most elevated form of artistic expression attainable only by a truly refined mind with a keen power of perception. Central to his discussion of ideal ornament was the relationship between form and color and the psychological dimension of color. He explained, Mere outline form may be good, but it is not satisfying. Mere light and shade may be pleasing, but it is not all that we require. With form, our very nature seems to demand color, and only when we get forms in combination with colors harmoniously arranged that we are satisfied. For Dresser, color harmony was central to achieving visual repose, which in turn provoked a feeling of satisfaction in the viewer. Dresser understood that color stimulated immediate feelings that took precedent over mental judgments. This insight was very important in his development of a non-representational ornament, and Bergdahl and other scholars have noticed that this psychological way of thinking about color also anticipated the impact of experimental psychology in the evolution of theories of abstract art. In his publication from 1862 and 1874, he instructed his readers, mostly aspiring designers, on how to attain perfect color harmony and achieve a sense of repose in interior design. Dresser believes that the three primary colors, either in their purity or in combination, had to be present in order to produce harmony. The primary colors in their perfect purity produce exact harmonies in the proportion of 8 parts of blue, 5 of red, and 3 of yellow. The secondary and tertiary colors had different harmonizing proportions. When designing decorative schemes for interiors, he believed the surface ornamentation should appear flat, and that the most beautiful effect on the walls was a neutralizing blue, he explained. A tertiary color, which is formed of 2 parts of yellow and 1 of red and 1 of blue, in fact, a citrine, is neutral, but a wall covered with a well-designed pattern of minute parts with the separate members colored red, blue, and yellow in proper ratios would be neutral, yet it would be refined and glowing in effect, and thus it would exceed in merit the mere tertiary tint on the wall. The ceiling was always the focus of Dresser's interior schemes and was never simply painted white. The ceiling was always the focus of Dresser's interior schemes, as I say, was never painted white. On the screen, you see examples of his ceiling decoration. Certainly, here the ornament recalls Arab motifs. However, Dresser used them as a source of inspiration and as a means to gain knowledge, to elaborate fresh, new ideas. It is unfortunate that very little remains of his colorful interior schemes. However, a large body of work survives from his activities as a commercial designer. His designs for Lintorp art pottery are of particular interest, as in their abstract form and pure color anticipate 20th century modernism. Dresser recognized the power of color and its centrality in the development of a new system of ornament suitable for industrial production and based on new design principles defined by recent discoveries in color science and in the emerging field of psychology. I would like to conclude this talk with this image, which I feel summarizes the most important points I have made. This is Hans' last work, which he finished with the help of assistants. The painting is a response to a famous poem by Alfred Tennyson, The Lady of Shalott. The poem describes a noble woman condemned to living in isolation in a tower. She is under a spell that compels her to weave into tapestry the life of the outside world as reflected in a mirror. She is not permitted to look outside her window. Should she decide to do so, she would invoke the spell's fatal curse. In the painting, the lady is shown as having just looked outside the window, eliciting the manifestation of the curse. A tremendous blast causes the cracking of the mirror, you see here. and the unraveling not only of the tapestry's threads, but also of the lady's destiny. Earlier in his career, Hunt created several works based on the same subject, but in the final painting, he made significant changes to the original composition, including detail that addressed and increased complexity in meaning. Scholars have argued that Hunt identified with the lady, and that she, in fact, represented the rebel artist. The Pre-Raphaelites, Jones and Dresser, easily fit this description. They rebelled against the art establishment and participated in the unraveling of all Victorian assumptions about art and design. They cracked the mirror of systemized approaches to art making. They neutralized fresh optical perceptions and debased color to a secondary role. They redefined the parameters for art making, advancing new system of visual organization centered on color perception. They welcomed new and direct interactions with nature, history, science, and the Orient. Ultimately, like the Lady of Shalott, they sought visual autonomy. Autonomy to look at the world through their own eyes and to elaborate new artistic expressions informed by novel outlooks that engage the viewer not as a passive observer, but as an active producer of a new and colorful tapestry. The end. Diane, you're muted.
Concetta, that was amazing. And do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can see oh, you just did. Okay. So if you have questions, did people put any questions in the chat? Or if not, raise your hand and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Yes, Margaret.
So Concetta, as a follow-up after the Pre-Raphaelites, what was the reaction? There's always a counter-reaction to everything, as they had theirs. So what was the follow-up counter-reaction to the